In Football Manager, tempo controls how patient or how urgent your team is playing. People say it's rather the speed of the tactic or speed of your team, and from my experience, that's not always the case. Hello, I'm DarkHorse FM, and in today's video, I'm going to break down tempo in Football Manager 2023. In Football Manager, the tempo has a bar or slider where you can pull to the left or to the right and reduce or increase your team's tempo, or basically the tempo of your tactic. Lower tempo encourages a patient approach to the way your team is playing, and it's useful for ball retention, while higher tempo encourages counterattacks and it's more suitable for urgent approach and trying to always attack the opposition. If you have slow players, switching to a high tempo will not make your team any faster. However, if you have fast players in your team and you're playing with a low tempo, this doesn't necessarily mean that your fast players won't use their pace to actually get past the opposition. They'll still do that when the opportunity presents itself. I know that's a lot of information for now, but we'll get through them. It's important to know some of this stuff when you're playing Football Manager. From Football Manager 2020, I think, or FM23, the team instructions in the game somewhat changed to allow managers to play a more short passing, possession game style of play using an urgent fashion, and also to play a direct long ball style of play playing on a low tempo. This wasn't always the case in previous Football Manager games, so it was a huge addition to Football Manager. The tempo is connected to your team's passing directness and your team's mentality. So notice that when you make changes to the passing directness, the tempo is affected. I feel the mentality is a lot more interesting, or the mentality connection is a lot more interesting, because for defensive and cautious mentalities, the tempo ideally would be lower, but in defensive mentalities that I've used playing on Football Manager 2023, my team is also able to just counter-attack the opposition and still score a goal on the counter-attack, especially when you have counter selected. So it doesn't necessarily mean that if you're playing with a defensive mentality that your team cannot go on a fast counter-attack. They'll still be able to do that, especially if you have fast players in your team. A similar approach can be applied to attacking mentalities. If you notice the way the attacking mentalities are, they are set up to help your team score goals as quickly as possible. So it also allows you, let's say the attacking mentalities will have a higher tempo by default, so even if you haven't touched the tempo sliders anyway. So you can alter this tempo by dropping the team's tempo to a much lower tempo, even though you're playing on an attacking mentality, to allow your team to try to score as much as possible, but playing with a patient, more possession-based approach to try and probe the opposition and walk the ball into the box and not just hoof it around and try to rush things, even though they're trying to score a goal. Tempo also affects how your team plays throughout the match. So during the beginning of the match, when your players have full energy, it's advisable to actually go on to play with a high tempo, but as the game continues to wear on, as your players get tired, it's not really advisable for you to go on playing with a high tempo, as that's going to completely shatter your players and they will not be able to carry on throughout the game. So towards, let me say, halftime, getting into the second half towards the 60th minute mark, you can go on to alter your tempo, try and slow it down, especially if you're in a lead already, you're winning 1-0, 2-0. Try to control the game more, try and reduce the tempo, and get your team, or allow your team have a lot more control of the game that you're playing. To experiment how tempo works, I suggest you just play with the balanced mentality and then start off the game, try to lower the tempo and see how your team behaves when they're playing with a low tempo, leaving the passing directness on just standard. Try to play with a low tempo and then with a much lower tempo, try and observe how your team is behaving, and then dial up the tempo all the way to high tempo and much higher tempo and see the differences in how your team behaves, so you can know how you can apply these tips and use it to your advantage, how you can take advantage of tempo and try to use it for your team's advantage. Now, all teams are not the same. Some teams will play better with a high tempo, some teams will play better with a low tempo. And in Football Manager, previously, I think FM23, it was always recommended that you play with a very high tempo, but I've noticed in Football Manager 2023, as much as high tempo does work and is highly favored by the match engine, it has its own negative effects on your team, so you can't always play with the high tempo. You have to pick and choose the right time in which you want to play with a high tempo. This is the best way you can actually go ahead to use it to your advantage. I hope you found this video useful, and if you did, let me know in the comment section. If you do have more questions about tempo, let me know in the comment section as well. If you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like on it and also to subscribe to the channel for more Football Manager tips like this. I'll see you in the next video.